So welcome. In our discussion, Lynn Preston is kind of exploring the crossing of focusing-oriented psychotherapy and psychoanalysis, specifically self-psychology.
Well, specifically contemporary relational psychoanalysis.
Okay, I knew I'd say it wrong.
Well, these are all little, like little towns within.
Yes. Well, yeah, you know your province and all the little towns much better than I do. And my name's Greg Madison, and I will be talking a little bit about the crossing of existential phenomenological psychotherapy and focusing-oriented therapy. So since we're carrying on from the first part, the question that I would like to ask you is, which of the, this is maybe a slightly different angle, which of the philosophical concepts in focusing and Jean's philosophy do you think are most useful in psychotherapy for psychotherapists, and maybe specifically for relational psychoanalytic therapists?
It seems like a very straightforward question, because Gendlin's philosophy, of course, is quite different than the philosophies that psychoanalytic therapy is derived from. But there is a great deal of overlap in the territory, and I would say that Gendlin's idea of being interaction, that interaction isn't two separate things that are exchanging, is the same territory as the psychoanalytic idea that that is known as intersubjective systems theory, that we are one system, and that the therapy takes place in the intersection of what the therapist brings and what the client brings. Stollerow wrote a paper that was quite mind-boggling at the time about the myth of the isolated mind, and that we aren't two separate minds. We're thinking together. We're all breathing each other, being each other, as well as Jean would emphasize, interacting with ourselves. And I remember telling Jean about that paper when it came out, and Jean smiled, and he said, well, it's not just the isolated mind, it's the isolated gut, the isolated everything. There is no isolated anything. And that was like, yes, of course. And both Stollerow and Jean are getting at something that is very, very important in psychotherapy. From a philosophical point of view, Jean's starting point is this, what he calls a new kind of concept, a concept that is its relating. And his paper, Befindlichkeit, about Heidegger's use of that term, meaning how are you-ness, or feeling, the feeling that is its relating. Psychoanalysts, the relational psychoanalysts, have just loved that paper, and prize it, because they're trying to get at that also. But Jean is starting with this new kind of concept, and the psychoanalysts are starting more from the place of Gadamer and conversation. I don't know if that really answers that question very well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it answers a lot of that question. It reminds me in existentialism of the concept of intersubjectivity, which people write a lot about, and yet I don't really see how it comes into practice. And I think that's where Gene's, I think his equivalent concept almost is the interaction first principle.
Mhm.
We're just talking about, where we are who we can become with each other. It's not like two separate people meeting and then some kind of interaction starts.
Yes,
Like the two people are already changed by their being together.
yes.
There's a kind of intersubjectivity, could be called. But the question for me often is, to existentialists and to all of us, myself included, is, so how do you actually work with that? And I think we started to talk about that a little bit last time, about working with the relationship. But that would be one of my questions to you, is if, for example, you're supervising a group of psychoanalysts, what kinds of things would you bring from your focusing experience that open things up for them or make an impact on the way they understand their practice and the way they practice?
Yeah. Gendlin has a wonderful way of bringing that philosophy into the immediacy of practice. And for example, the idea of that I love, that it isn't what we're saying, it's the doing in the saying.
Mm-hmm.
It's what we're doing. And he uses the example of the therapist saying, yes, go out there, stick up for yourself. Don't let them blah, blah, and that what he's saying is very different than what is happening. What the doing is again, somebody is telling the client what to do.
Mm-hmm.
That being aware of what we're living together, what we're doing in the saying, is such a powerful and immediate, and it takes time for therapists to sort of get that. Oh, it's not what we're talking about. It's what we're living together, and my ingredients of the interaction that matter. And that's very, very powerful for both psychoanalytic and focusing therapists have a sort of a double take about that. And from both traditions, that sort of general idea is known, but the immediacy of it in the moment isn't known. And another principle that I find so striking for people is that idea of being on its side.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole notion that there's a level, there's an it, there's a client's client, there's a one in there.
Mm-hmm.
And that, as Jean would say, it's good to hear from that. Even if the news is bad news, there's a release or a forward movement, a growth in being able to hear from it and be able, and that when we say something, it's going to talk back. So if the therapist says something like, it feels like we're stuck in this spot, then Jean will say, well, then the sensitive therapist isn't the one that knows, but the one that knows to pay special attention to the next thing that comes. Oh, you think we're stuck? Oh, I didn't know that. And then Jean would say, oh, forget that. It's not stuck. There was a pause or how would you say it? That immediate responding to the it,
Mm-hmm.
relying on the it speaking.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to just respond to that. There's a lot of different things going through my head. One of the things that's going through my head is the importance of noticing with clients or with supervisees that the experience can move itself forward. I think therapists especially, and clients, all of us, can easily get seduced into thinking we must do something, we have to show it the right way or something like that, rather than, as you were just saying, noticing what little movement it's wanting to make for itself, how it's wanting to live itself a little bit more in some way. And it's interesting to me how often I remember in a discussion with Gene, he was talking about practice, and I was listening to him and I said, so it's really all completely empirical? And he goes, yes, it's all empirical. And that to me is for me, that's what I mean by phenomenology. It's like you constantly want to look and see, did that do anything, or what happened there, or what's alive now? You're never wanting to just assume, well, that must have done something, or that's got to be the right direction. You always want to check, did that do something? Did that bring more expansiveness, or are we closer together now? Or that checking back, like, what is the fact now? And then what is the fact now? Because we know that as soon as you find how it really is, then it starts to be something more than that.
Yes. I love that.
That's
Yeah.
the other thing that I like to say is I find often that we're wanting to pin things down in therapy. We're wanting to say, we know what that is, or we've got a name for that. Or we've been over that. That's settled now. We've talked about the first 6 years of life. How about what happened when you were 7? All of that kind of pinning things down. This way of working that we're talking about is the opposite of that. It's like you never quite pin anything down. Everything still has life in it. And everything is kind of metaphoric. It's like, it's as if, and then you say how a description that fits that moment. And then it's like, it's as if, and then there's another description that comes. And it's that kind of metaphoric unfolding where it's true that you get answers along the way that bring, relief or whatever, but you don't ever have a conclusion that you pin on the wall. Everything remains open and just kind of gets bigger and more expansive. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. It the metaphor comes to me of pinning down the butterfly, and in Jean's approach, you are touching it ever so gently and letting it fly. And when you touch it, it flies. So just saying what happened to you at the age of 7 is sort of pinning down, but it's about the way that you say, oh, it's like the concept of pathological accommodation in psychoanalysis. It was like, and I wouldn't use that term, but it's like you, before you even knew it, you were had to be for your mother or something. And I'm touching it with that concept. Then the person might say, oh, yeah. Or they might say, yeah, yes, before I knew it, and I don't even know it now, when I'm just automatically being what other people need me to be. It's that way of touching with a term, a concept, a theory, metaphor, right? That then you're aware of this setting the butterfly free, and that's what counts, not
exactly. And as you say, you're wanting to see, did it set the butterfly free or not?
That's right.
If it didn't, then you want to just drop it and say, well, let's try again. If this butterfly wants to be free, how can we be with it such that we can touch it? And the way you were saying it is so important, because even now when you're saying it in this example, I can feel it inside of my body. I can feel it inside of my body because you're saying it with some true feeling in it.
Yes, yes.
And I think that is so important. I often say to supervisees, allow yourself to be affected and let that come through somehow, so that the client is never getting some rote sort of reflection or anything like that. They're getting something that has been digested through someone else, and they can feel that somebody else in the world has felt what they've just been feeling.
Yes.
I think that in itself, it implies you could be welcomed back into the community of human beings again.
Yes, absolutely. And that idea that it isn't inside the client, that if the client can't focus or they can't be in touch with their feelings, then you have to resort to guiding them or something, or giving them advice or something. But that the feeling is in the interaction. So the feeling may be from the client, may be in me, and of course it will be in me differently than in the client. But if I can show how it's in me, wow, that must have really been something. If I have that and express that, then the feeling is in our interaction.
Exactly. And I think you're pointing to how at first sometimes it's like the client has to piggyback on our own feeling process in order to wake up to their part of the feeling process. But it sometimes comes through us first.
Yes. But in a way, we can say from this philosophy that it isn't just at times, and it isn't just piggybacking, but it's always coming through us, through the interaction. And it's never just in the client or just in us.
Completely. The interaction first.